Hi, good morning, Charl. Good afternoon for you, right?
Good morning, Marilia. Yes, it's afternoon, yeah.
Great. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation. It's a great pleasure to have you here speaking to our students. And I would like to introduce you, first of all, for people who are listening to us, okay? This is the poet and novel writer Charl-Pierre Naudé. Charl is the author of 3 poetry anthologies in Afrikaans, which is a South African language, and 1 poetry anthology in English. He is the author of a novel in Afrikaans, but that's going to be translated. It's in the process of translation into English. And if everything goes well, into Portuguese, because we are working on publishing his novel in Brazil. He's also a well-known reviewer of books in Afrikaans and English, and has submitted a doctoral thesis in philosophy and literature at the University of Free State in South Africa. All his works of fiction have received notable prizes in South Africa, as well as his work as a book reviewer. In 2014 and 15, he lived in Berlin as a writer in residence of the Berliner Arts Program of that. I was going to ask you what is DAAD, but then you tell me just after, okay? His poetry, prose, and essays in translation have appeared in numerous literary magazines in the Netherlands, Belgium, England, Norway, and Germany from 2000 to 2021. And his bilingual book format in the Netherlands. The latest is I don't know how to pronounce it, Harpuch. Der Lyric is GAHRBUCH.
The latest what, Marilia? Let me just GA, yeah.
JAHRBUCH.
I've missed you there. We can come back to that.
Okay. Der Lyric. Something you published in 2021, but I can pronounce it.
That was in Germany.
Yes, Berlin.
Oh, so it is the book Buch der Lyrik or something of German literature.
Yes,
and they it's got some of the translations that appeared that year in Germany in magazines. So they put 2 of my. Oh no, wait! It did not work like that. It was my German translator, without me knowing, sent some translations in, and it got published in the book. Yeah,
it's a poem book, right?
It's a poem book.
It's a poem.
Yeah.
It's a poetry book. Yes.
Yes. It's an anthology.
Okay. Charl has read at international festivals of poetry in Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and Slovakia. As a poet, prose writer, and essayist, he lives in Johannesburg, South Africa. He has published 3 volumes of poetry so far, 2 in English, and a novel, the one I mentioned to you. Naudé has worked as a journalist, editor, freelance, literary critic, and book reviewer, as well as a writer, right?
Yes.
And so I give you Charl-Pierre Naudé. Okay?
Thank you, Marilia. Thank you, and good morning to everybody that might be listening. It is a rare pleasure for me to speak to you over such a distance. Thank you very much to the university, and I hope we will have a nice chat. Marilia and myself decided that we will concentrate a little bit on my novel today, but I want to say I want to sketch a background picture of what I think is shared by Brazil and South Africa. So the bigger picture in which a writer finds themselves. I mean, we as writers take our impulses to write from the society we find ourselves in, and we want to then communicate with that society, maybe bring a change of a perception, maybe celebrate a particular aspect of it, but we also want to speak to people outside of that society. So it is a mixture of the particular, the search for writing is a mixture of the particular and the universal, where these two things can find one another and then communicate. I always say that in my poetry especially, I try to find the intensely political, but also the intensely private. I try to see where these two can come together and fashion moments that speak to both realms at the same time. That is my striving, my ideal. Now, the title of our speech today is Writing Under Oppressive Times. And the first thing that must come to mind to you people, that I am a writer from South Africa in post-apartheid times. But of course, I grew up under apartheid. So when I speak about oppressive times, I'm referring to two different types of oppressiveness that the writer must work through. These were two different times, but in a very strange way, the writer's position in South Africa has not become less oppressive. I will explain to you now that I do not see this necessarily as a deeply negative thing. Let us look at the two terms of the discussion of my lecture, Writing Under Oppressive Times. And the first term is writing, and the second term is oppressiveness. The first term, writing, is the process of giving fresh and relevant meaning as to how we are alive in a particular place and time, and how we carry on. So writing is always an interpretation. This interpretation might be done in various ways. One can even write about the past in order to interpret the present, of course. It is, for me, always really about the question how to survive in the present. To be alive is a gift, but under pressure, this is easily forgotten. So writing, first of all, finds ways to show us again what a gift life is, no matter what the circumstances. Of course, this is much easier for some people to see than others. You know, I come from a part of the South African society which is a relatively privileged, and you will, and probably the academic people in Brazil also come from a relatively privileged place in a society that is suffering to a large extent in terms of the lives of many people. But nevertheless, life is a gift, and one wants to show this in writing. Even pessimistic writing draws attention to the gift of life, but of course in a roundabout way. And secondly, how we can treat the gift of other people's lives in a way that they can also realize and not forget that life is a gift. This is also one of the things that we try and do, that I try and do when I write. So the first term is both aesthetic and ethical in nature. I would say that the first term is the more comprehensive term for me. I would say this, maybe I have a kind of a Nietzschean understanding of this, and that the ethical is a part, in a strange way, of the aesthetic. One tends to forget this in life, but art and literature are the things that show us this, show us that the ethical comes out of the aesthetic, and that the aesthetic is not just an embellishment of the hard truth, it is the entire truth. The second term, oppressiveness, is most interesting because it is paradoxical. All writers write under a state of oppressiveness in a certain sense, even in the best of times, because oppressiveness is one of the two components of desire. If you desire, be it life or another person or another situation or another world, you feel two things. You feel a measure of oppressiveness, but also a measure of inspiration to overcome that oppressiveness. It is the oppressiveness of the desiring urge that releases the inspiration to overcome it. So let us not see oppressiveness as only something bad and evil. It is also the catalyst that creates inspiration, and inspiration is what will presumably set one free to a certain extent until you start desiring again, which you will always do. So one is, of course, never really completely free, but it's a situation of tension that you strive for, that you strive within. Now, we have to say that Brazil and South Africa are on very bad times at present. It's not only latitudes that we share this in economy and many other things. So we have good reason to feel oppressed. Yet it's good to keep in mind, the bigger the oppression, the higher the potential is for the inspirational vision that might be born in the desire to escape that oppression. So this last sentence characterizes the position of the writer today for me in both these countries. And there is much in that situation which one can regard as being hopeful. It is a special pleasure, as I've already said, to speak to a country which feels like my sister country, even though I've never been there. But I have a feeling that even in our natural surroundings, we are quite similar, because we have much in common structurally. So our fates are similar, but not the same. And of course, there's much about Brazil that I cannot understand from here. Even if I would visit, there will be things that I won't be able to understand without becoming informed. So it's really nice to me to keep in mind the feeling that I'm speaking to a place in the heart of Brazil. Chocatin, is, if I pronounce it more or less okay. And that feels special to me. I want to make a second point now before we get to the discussion, before we get into the question and answer session with Marilia. And that is the following. Both South Africa and Brazil are countries where a modernity, this is not the background from which writers in Brazil and South Africa write, which we share, I think, structurally. We are both countries where there is a modernity imported from Europe a long time ago, in the 17th century and the 16th century for Brazil, imported from Europe, so to speak, the early modernity, and it coexists with a pre-modernity, or rather the local cultures whose modernity had been postponed or thwarted by the event of a powerful modernity that had arrived from outside. and which called the shots. So this is a situation of tension that exists in both countries. This coexistence actually also makes for fascinating materials. And it allows the modern human to look into his own past in real time. This is something that the Europeans cannot do unless they go to a museum. But we can, go to some parts of our country and we can see it in real time. It is fascinating material for poetry and novel, and also philosophy, the three main genres that which I personally write in. Some people will typify this coexistence of the modern and the local as a clash between indigenous and colonialism, which is a good description, but these terms have also started to show their limits for me personally. What we can say for certain, no matter which terms we use, is that there is a power relationship between these two terms, between these two realities, which mainly benefits the modern side of the equation and exploits either willingly or unwillingly or unwittingly the other part. The other part which is still seeking the terms of its own modernity. Because modernity is a state of culture which built on a previous state of culture. In the case of Europe, it built on the Middle Ages, and the modernities of Africa and South America that are indigenous and local. One can imagine that they are living a modern life within the framework of European modernity, but for them it might be very interesting to translate their heritage also in modern terms some or other time. This is a modernity that would maybe to a certain extent look different and have another kind of freshness than the European modernity that we live with. We must also remember that the people of Brazil, as well as in South Africa, that represent the modern part of culture, I will speak more for South Africa now, we're always also behind in terms of European modernity, because my ancestors, for instance, came to South Africa in the earliest ones in 1680, and South Africa is very far from the places that they came from, and they remained. If I can quote one of the important thinkers and poets of South Africa, N.P. van Wyk Louw, the Afrikaans white person in South Africa remained a 17th century person up to 1920-25. Now you must know that this is a situation that has impacted on the whole of South Africa. This is also the reason why a relatively crude and almost atavistic system like apartheid could have been accepted as if it is by the people of South Africa as if it was something modern, which it wasn't, of course. It is because our modern culture itself is not has always been a reflected modernity. Okay. Anyway, so the clash is about whose modernity and to what end are we building a culture. I personally believe and I follow the philosopher that I write about, Hans Blumenberg, that modernity is a crucial term to use and to keep in mind when we are speaking about a clash, certain clashes of culture. For instance, let us look at the limits of the term indigenous and colonial. In South Africa, you have the language Afrikaans, in which I've produced most of my work. It is a language that originated among the brown slaves and laborers of South Africa, a Creole form of Dutch and in certain structural respects. Of this language, it can be said that it was an indigenous creation. Yet, in apartheid times, this language, which is one of the few examples where the ruling class, the post-Dutch colonists, let me call them that, took over a language from the subalterns and made it their own. It's one of the very few examples in the world that has happened. Normally, it's the other way around. But then they took this language and made it a symbol of their own ruling class oppression. They made it a symbol of their power. So such travesties are not uncommon in the workings of oppressive powers. I want to make the point that it's not so much where something comes from, if it is going to be an oppressive thing or not, it is what you do with it in real time. Similarly, in Brazil, we see the Amazon forest being decimated in terms of crude capitalism in a modern structure, yet in the name of helping indigenous people. There's something of a contradiction there. So we see that the origin of a concept, as I've just said, or phenomenon, does not necessarily put it on the right side of the power relation. It rather depends on what you do with it, regardless of its origin, and if it is going to benefit the liberation and empowerment of subaltern people or formerly subjected people. Of course, if subaltern people get more liberated, the people of the people on the other side of the power structure also become more liberated. It is a liberation not to be an oppressor anymore. That is a liberation, one of the most important liberations that one can experience. It all depends on the function, as I say, of a cultural phenomenon or instrument. As the philosopher Blumenberg, on whom I have written my doctorate recently, argues, cultural contents are not so much substances as they are functions. A particular substance, say the idea of faith in God or the idea of knowledge, change their functions through the ages, according to who uses these ideas. And this is where the power of subaltern people start coming in. If it is true that ideas are what they are according to their functions, those ideas become your own when you change the functions to the needs of your own time and place and environment. Then they become your own creation. They become your own regardless of where they come from, because they are not the same idea anymore, strictly speaking, even though they carry the same name. And this, I think, is an empowering thought. So now I've given the listeners a picture of where I think a South African writer and a Brazilian writer find themselves in terms of the similarities of the pressures they are under. I want to stress again that even though my talk now has emphasized the ethical calling of a writer, I want to emphasize that I do see the ethical as an underpart of the aesthetic nature of life and the aesthetic calling of being alive. This, of course, is not a new idea. I think the philosopher who made this idea famous more than other philosophers was Nietzsche. And it is an empowering thought as well to think that if you can make something beautiful without knowing necessarily how you are going to be more just, if you can only make it more beautiful, a more just equation might very well arise out of that, making it more beautiful. Marilia, I think we can go over to our questions now, and I hope I made sense to the listeners. I can't hear.
Okay.
Yes.
It's okay now? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Yes.
Now, thank you, first of all, because I think this approximation you made about between Brazil and South Africa, it really works, and because we are still under colonialism processes. We are a free nation, but the indigenous people still lives under the tutelage or the patronizing government, okay, as in South Africa. So
yes, yes.
Charl, I would like to ask you, because many people who is now hearing you, they did not have the opportunity of listening to one of your poems. And before we go to the novel, I'd like to ask you to read that poem, if it's possible, that you read during the workshop.
Okay.
Because I think it talks about everything you just told us.
Yes. As I said earlier, I grew up under a different kind of oppression than the one that I'm living in at the moment. So my earlier poetry was all about more working with the apartheid heritage, that was passed on. Now, of course, we're working with a different situation. It is the struggle of so-called liberated people to do the right thing. It was something else fighting the bad ones. Now it is something else. Let me just write the poem so that it can speak for itself. A Time for No Words, South Africa, 2015. It now seems a punishment, the cherished collectivity, a thing to avoid. It's all around, I'm breathing, dying of it. Politics. I'm sick of the way things have become, of this. A public smuggling of hammers in cotton wool, a cachet of noisy turn handles, do-it-yourself tools, one size fits all, distributed at party rallies to take home and hoist up tall truths of the unwrit, written off, truth-read word. Deceit, fraud, plunder, and today is another one of those famous days, commemorative days with their beautiful corrupted names. Heroes Day, Freedom Day, Day of the Disabled, National Upturned Dustbin Day, Day of the Presidential Turd. And it happens to be National Women's Day, but all I want is to be alone. What a feast! What women are there for at times? The sanctity of that. Naturally, I'll think of these givers of gifts. But in God's name, without words. Did I mention fate? Reference to a particular woman? Then it must have been in my thoughts. I walk into the street for a stroll. A wind is being whipped up, and with winged generosity, it sticks a wet leaf gently on my cheek. Damn such politics. It's nothing but diplomacy. What can one say to this all? I know of a house down the street, recently boarded up. The crockery and the silver is tied in thick wads of newspaper and cased in boxes. Nobody had read the noisy print, since nobody cared. but it had a function. The workmen worked fast, while the owners stood by. Then everybody had to leave in haste, for it is a race against time. But one day the heirs will return to their heritage pasted in faded lies, and with tears in their eyes, unwrap the porcelain. Marilia, I can't hear.
Sorry, I thought it's a very strong poem, and
thank you.
I think it represents a lot of what you spoke, and it concentrates all the let's say the way you think about the world and through words. So it's very, I loved it very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, Charl, as
Yes.
also for our listeners, you moved from poetry to prose and also philosophy. So how does it work for you? I mean, how does you cope with writing poetry, writing prose, and doing it under, let's say, the idea of the philosophers? I mean, how does it work for you?
Yes, your last sentence is important. I think that the type of poetry I write has a reflective side, a kind of a thinking side to it.
Okay, it seems that he lost his connection. So let's wait a little bit, because I believe he'll come back soon. Anyway, while he prepares himself to come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about his novel, which I am starting to translate into Portuguese, because we are looking for publication in Brazil. And it's a very interesting novel and deals a bit with fantastic too. The story is about, it starts with two young couple, or a young couple who is found naked in a church, and they were locked there because it was outrageous for the time. But when their parents are notified, they were in fact sleeping on their beds. So the novel starts with a puzzle. So what's going on? What's happening in this place? And I think I'm not going to give you a spoiler. It's very interesting the way Charl creates a writer, a fictional writer, who writes about the story. It's like, it reminds me of Robinson Crusoe, whose story was supposedly taken from a diary. I think it's going to be a novel with good perspectives in Brazil. So another thing that Charles told me while we were talking before the presentation is how his poetry speaks from his heart. I mean, how he writes and he deals with writing, both as a citizen, as a philosopher, and as a person who have this perception, has this perception of the place he's in, the way he is living, how, as he said, the clashes of culture that are present in his country, and also the changes that happened in South Africa, but also looking around. I mean, he approximated South Africa with Brazil and other places that were colonized and still have structures of social structures that resembles these countries. You mentioned the oppressive and inspirational elements in literature composition. How do you balance them? Okay, I'll try to contact Charl to see if he's able to come back. But I think he lost his connection. Okay, let's wait. Okay. The title of the novel is The Incredible Innocence of Dirk Verney. I don't know if this is the right pronunciation, because the character's name, most of them are in Afrikaans. And Afrikaans has a very complex phonetics for us. Okay, so this is the book. You see, I'm translating it. And I hope we manage to publish it in Brazil very soon. And it's a very interesting story, as I told you. It makes a little of reality with magical reality, so it's very interesting. Silvana, we have to wait to see if Charlie can come back. I don't know if Micaela can connect him. Just a moment. Okay, I believe he's out of his internet, unfortunately, because it was dark in his place before the connection fall. Okay. I tried to connect him again, but maybe we can go back to his poem while we are waiting. Micaela, please. Yes. I'd like to listen to you guys about this poem. A Time for No Words remind me of O Fim da Poesia, Não É Mais Possível Poesia, that we heard so many times during hard times. And so how to manage, how the writer can cope with all the situation he lives in, the place he was born, the place, the situation where he grew up. As Charles said, he grew up during apartheid. Okay, so where the schools were separated, streets and everything, every single aspect of life was separated for blacks and whites. So I remember when I talked to him earlier, and he's not the only writer from South Africa that I used to read. And it was very difficult, they say, for men of conscience, people who are conscient of their time and of the process, the power relations, to be okay with the system, to cope with the system. So one of the ways of transgressing it or trying to denounce it or trying to break it is through literature, through their writings. Naudé has other, of course, he has written other poems, very strong ones too, but he also writes about life. There are some poems, they are lyrical poems, and oh, he's back. Okay, thank you, Michaela. Yes, Charles, I'll just telling people about your. No, it's okay. It's okay. It happens. It's modernity. Oh. So, Michaela, you can please take off the poem, please. Yes. Thank you. I was just telling them about your.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. I was just telling them about your novel. And I just gave them a glimpse about the writing. It's like, it's a kind of also magic realism that you have at the beginning, especially. And can you talk a little more about your novel?
Yeah, I can. There's just one thing. My papers, I have now gotten. I've left it in my office. If you will give me 1 minute, I will quickly go fetch it because I just brought. Or otherwise, you must just read me the points that we made that you have there.
Sorry, the points. Yes, yes. I'd like you to talk.
Marilia, let me go fetch the paper quickly. That is probably better.
Okay. All right. I'm writing the title novel. The novels. I'm sorry, I got nervous when I fell. We're not always prepared for everything. The Incredible Innocence. Innocence. So he'll be back soon. I'm sorry, I'm just not prepared for this, for the shutdown of his internet. Anyway, I asked him to talk about his novel, and because it's a very interesting way of approaching some subjects, but I will let him speak for it, okay? Just a moment.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay, and I was just telling them that they asked me about the title, the novel's title, and I was just, while you were gone, I was talking about the plot and some characters. So you may take from there, or maybe you can talk about the theme of the novel and what you think it might be interesting for our students to know about your writing process as well. And the shift from poetry to prose, and
Yeah, just before the electricity went out, we were talking about where poetry and novel and philosophy comes together for me as a writer. To me, I think I've never, because my poetry has a reflective side to it, a kind of a thinking side. It's never really completely separate from my discursive writing or necessarily of the novel. But I have to say the following. I don't know how to explain it, but I know that poetry comes from another place in the psyche than either novel or philosophy or discursive writing. It comes from another place. I think that in my, as I carry on living more, I will find out more about how these places differ. But the kind of inspiration is different. But there's enough for it to that links them all together to bring them together for me. Now the novel, I wanted to write something, I suppose, that I felt could in the end stand as a metaphor, almost as a pictogram for the kind of society that South Africa is. It is a society, a country that embodies different realities. And the novel, I will show you the cover of the novel. There it is. You can see it's got a shape of a person on and then another person inside the person's head. The story is about a writer. He's a fictitious writer, but I was very happy to realize that one or two reviewers of the book thought that my story was historical, and that took as a compliment, because it meant that they could identify with it to such an extent that they thought it was real history. But it isn't. It is fiction, and it is about a writer called Hermanus Verdonk, who wrote a novel in the 80s. He was a journalist of a small town in the Karoo, which is in the center of South Africa, and it's an area of very wide open spaces. It's a mythical place for South Africans to a certain extent. Many writers have this mythical point of the expanse, the lonely expanse of the Karoo, which is at the center of their psyche. James Coetzee wrote a book, The Life and Times of Michael Kay, for instance, that has something of the Karoo in it, and he often refers to the Karoo because he went there to. He often refers to it, and I think he was one of the writers.
I'm sorry, just to explain to the audience, the Karoo is a place more or less like our Cerrado, beach dryer,
Yes.
but it's similar. I mean, open spaces, not too many trees. It's dry. Okay.
Yes, and it is a place that lends itself to mythicization. It is a place that almost asks of the person who experiences it to experience something different. So the story goes that it is a novel that was written by this man, Hermanus Verdonk, and then somebody else discovers the novel again in a desk drawer, and then sends it to a publisher, who then sends it to me, Charl-Pierre Naudé, and then I arrange with the original writer to publish the novel. But the original writer doesn't want anything to do with a novel, because it reminds him of a suffering time in his life. But the crux of the novel, the crux of the story, is that I haven't got the English translation in front of me now, which is a pity. I don't want to go back to my office. But it is about the fact that it seems like people experience themselves in more than one place at a particular time. And or else experience themselves as having more than one identity. The writer wrote the novel, Hermanus Verdonk wrote the novel and based it on a diary that he found of one of the characters. And in the diary, she depicts her other lives. Entirely logical lives, but different to the one that she was really living. The life that she was really living was as a teacher of indigenous background in the middle of the Karoo, teaching the children of farm laborers and mission station people that work at a mission station. It was a mission school. That was her life in so-called real time. She had these other lives, and then Hermanus Verdonk starts constructing these other lives of hers, and the reader then sees different sides of her life. She's, for instance, in the main other life of her in the diary is as a freedom fighter who has a relationship with this Dirkie Verwy, but not the one in the real time of the book. She has a relationship with another version of him, essentially, that she encounters in her imagination and that she writes the diary about. The real-time Dirkie Verwy is somebody who became catatonic and had ended up in a mental institution and who essentially did not have a life of his own. So the only life that he had was this other life in the diary of this girl. I would have to consult the sentences in my translation to make it more clear. But I hope that I gave a background of the story. The editor of the book is then me, and the story is then all about how these lives come up into tension with one another, and the logical impetus for the fact that a character would have these different lives is the oppression of the apartheid time and the strong urge of the characters to escape their ordinary lives. Am I making more or less sense, Marilia?
Yes, you are. Can you
it sounds
together? No, it's okay. Maybe for me it's easier because I know the novel. Okay, but I think you are making it clear. Okay. May I ask you, for example, where do you think there is a point of connection or a common area among your poems, the novel, and your philosophical thought? I mean, you said that you try to think your writings from a philosophical perspective. And how does it cope with your notion of reality and modernity?
I think that all three spheres of my writing work very strongly with the idea of mythicization and the part of the human psyche that mythicizes its reality, and that is why the topic of that's why I also chose to write about a philosopher that writes about the place of myth and the tension that it has with rational thinking, Hans Blumenberg. So all three spheres have that connection to trying to explore the mythicizing part of the human psyche. My poems are like that. Like, for instance, you have a poem that I sent you called Nature and the Revolution. That poem shows something of that. And then the novel has some structural connections to that kind of those poems that I wrote in that time. Let me think if I can answer your question a little bit more to the point. It is very important for me when I write a novel or the poetry that it doesn't sound like philosophy at all. It must not be anything like that. It must be a story. It must, if it thinks, then it must think in terms of story. That is very important for me. So there is also a very big difference between the two. But fortunately, my topic in philosophy is a philosopher who wrote an entire book of philosophy on the story-making need and urge of mankind, of humankind. The book is called Work on Myth in English, and in German it is called Arbeit am Mythos. Yeah. So there are differences and similarities. But novel writing and poetry is not, of course, philosophy. Even when it thinks, as I said, even when it reflects, it is not philosophy. Philosophy does everything from the other side.
Yes, that's why I say sometimes they are, let's say, opposite, not opposite, but they come from different sides. They come from, you mentioned that poetry comes from another place. And I thought maybe heart, while philosophy comes from the reason and the reasoning of things. And poetry and writing comes from the soul. I don't know if it's okay to say it for you.
I think we can go with that. I think one can go with that. The heart definitely for poetry. Let's get a metaphor for each one. The heart for poetry, the soul for story writing and the novel, and the head for poetry, the head for philosophy.
Okay. And Charl, let me ask you something. I have some notes. For example, when you wrote, you sent me some years ago some poems. You remember?
Yeah.
The first two poems I read, and I listened to you reading your poem during the workshop and today, and I see a difference. I mean, like if in the past 10 years, you have got you to dominate words strongly, in a stronger way, you know.
There was, sorry.
Okay.
You will have to repeat because it went off again for a moment.
Okay, so I said that I feel a difference between the writer you were 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, and the writer you are now. I mean, there is a maturity in your poems. You have a better, let's say, not a better is not the word, but a different approach, even to language, I think. The way you use words. Like I enjoyed very much your recent poems, the poems you read to us. So what happened between these 12 last years that changed you somehow?
I think Morelia, that I can already, when I look at my first book of poetry, the last poems in it, I can see the second book happening. But there was a very big difference, and between those two. And then, right at the end of the second book, I could see the beginnings of the third book. So it does seem as if but they are you there? They are very different. I'm not always sure what is that is different, but I know that it is important for me when I write a new book I have the urge to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But as I just explained, there are things that grow organically out of the previous one, but then I feel a kind of a force to do something different. I wouldn't be able to say what exactly happened. The country changed a lot. Obviously, my own life also, how this impacted on my writing, I cannot always see the connection. And I know that I know what I want to do in a following book of poetry. I wanted to have as few words as possible.
Okay.
So I can already feel it going to that direction. And I know what I want to do in a next novel. I've written a long novel now. I never ever have to write a long novel again. I feel like writing, and I've already, if I look at my new manuscripts, it will be novels. So you can see that when I've done something, there's a pressure in me to do something else.
Okay, that is something I can say. Sorry.
No, you can't. Correct.
Yeah, I mean that's something I noticed that you are more concise in your images. Your images are conciser.
Yeah.
I think you express more in less words. So this is, I think this means.
The poems that I sent you worked with, poetry always works with metaphor, but those poems worked with the idea of a story becoming metaphor. I can mention two poets that maybe that my own poetry of that time makes me think of. In that respect, maybe maybe Pavese, the Italian poet, and Raymond Carver, the American poet. These are. I'm not saying that I am in their class as a poet, but I'm saying that there are some things in that time of my poetry that remind me today when I look back on these other poets. Now it is something different. I don't know exactly where it's going, but it's not anymore.
Okay, Charl, you were frozen for some seconds, but I think we got it what you wanted to say. And we have now, I think, 10 minutes to finish. And I'd like to open to the audience for questioning. And do you want to say something before we start answering questions?
Okay, let me just see. Let me just. I thought I would describe the novel because you know that I sent you a description of it that my publisher gave to some catalog.
Yes.
But I think we've already done that. It is presented as the manuscript of a small town journalist, complete with images and footnotes. by the editor, who is me, and it's set in a very conservative Northern Cape community. Now, the Northern Cape is a mixture of settler people, if I may use that word, let's say European communities, and indigenous. But the indigenous people are also of mixed race people, and they are called coloureds in South Africa. But these are separate communities, especially in the apartheid times. So my novel works with the tension between these two communities and how their attempts to come together are thwarted and so forth. So I think I would say that. But apart from that, there's nothing else that I can say. Let the listeners ask me something if they have.
Okay. Yes, we have two questions here. One is from Regina, which is our student. In Brazil, most writers are white. How is the literature scenario in South Africa? Is there a proportional equality between white and black writers?
This is a very, very important and very good question. There are writers that write in English and writers that write in Afrikaans. The Afrikaans market is still the bigger one in terms of the local readership, and then there are black writers that write mainly in English, but now of late they are starting to move over to their indigenous languages, isiXhosa and isiZulu. So there is that development. If I look at the Afrikaans language, the poetry scene, it was historically white. It is now becoming at a very fast pace. It is becoming more colored and black. The writers themselves from those, but especially more colored.
There were a lot of incentives. There were many incentives. There were many public, incentives for people, for white people, black people, and colored people to write.
Yes, the publishers have gone on a concerted effort to develop writers from those communities. And I was also involved in because in my function as an editor for publishers, I also take part in that process. And these communities, of course, are very inspired to become writers because they are at that stage. So I assume that the ratio between white and black and colored, it will become smaller, the white part, and bigger the other part. Yes.
Okay.
So even in a language that is historically seen as white, it is changing. Afrikaans.
Afrikaans. Okay. Yeah. In another way, in which way do you think?
Well, the speakers of this language are about 65% colored and black and 35% white. But the middle class of this language is about 60% white, or even 65% white, and 35% colored. So you can see the tensions there. The speakers are mostly from people of color, and the communities are different in culture to a certain extent. But the middle classes are connecting much more, and there the ratio is the other way.
Okay. It's a complex situation. Yes.
And of course, literature is very much an elite industry to a certain extent. Unfortunately. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Charl, I have another question from Professora Silvana. You mentioned the oppressive and inspirational elements in literature composition. In your opinion, how to balance them so that the first does not suppress the second and vice versa?
Oh, that's also a good question. For me, it comes naturally because I do not write, to die. I write to live, if I might say it. So no matter how oppressed a situation is, and the situation in South Africa has been up to recently terribly oppressive. Now it is starting to change a bit because we can see the political landscape changing, after we had local elections, and there's a lot of hope there. It was very oppressive, but even when it is at its most oppressive, I believe that the whole endeavor of writing for me is to create light, to come out of the darkness, if I might put it.
Yes. This way. Yeah, it's interesting because I think you went through all the 80s and the 90s, which were very hard times. And not to be, let's say, contaminated by the violence and by the oppression and the censorship. It was really a great deal, to keep truth to yourself, to be truthful to yourself.
They are very much so. Yes. It was, it is a very difficult thing for South African people that supported the idea of liberation and so forth, to find themselves in a situation where there is a new failure of humanity. And now they have just changed positions. But I think it is a wonderful lesson of life, that one will not always be on the same place doing what you want to do,
Yes.
We have in our post-apartheid society not only had we have not only had failures. I mean, it was a society that was radically divided, and at least we got to know one another to a certain extent, and we can mix, and we have mixed marriages more, and we have and so forth. So and we have a very strong black and brown intelligentsia that is coming up. I mean, it is them who is changing the government, because the white people we are a minority. We will never be able to change. We will never be able to change any government on our own. But we can see that it is busy changing now, and it's these people who are doing it. And it's exciting. South Africa is not unexciting, despite its difficulties.
Okay, Charl, we have only 5 minutes left, so I'd like to thank you very much. The organization of the Congress, our conferences, are thanking you very much for coming, for accepting our invitation. And on behalf of them, I thank you very much. And I'm sure there will be other questions, but I can mail it for you afterwards. Because I thought I didn't emphasize questions, because I think our students want to know you, to listen to you. So it was very nice from you to be available for us. And do you have an idea when your book will be available in English?
Say again?
When your book will be available?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet because I have only now really completed it, going through it another time. So there is no date yet for that to happen.
Okay. So as soon as you have it, please let us know.
Yes. My publisher has told me that because of the peculiarities of the South African publishing industry, and because books from Afrikaans that get translated into English actually get, according to them, read by the same people again. So they are not going to publish it, but there are many other publishers in South Africa, and I am actually so essentially my publisher will be not the same one that published the Afrikaans. So we will still, but the Afrikaans people, the Afrikaans publisher did see the English translation and they liked it a lot. So I have their support in finding a publisher that works with them.
Okay.
And I will let you know what happens there. And but I will speak with you over email about that and other things.
That's okay. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you also enjoyed being part of our event.
Very much.
Yes. And if the students ask for your contact, may I share with them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's it.
I want to thank you.
Yes.
Sorry? You and the university. I want to thank you and the university and everybody who listened to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who is there for us and the students who helped organizing it also, the monitors. Without you, we'll be completely lost. So thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye. Ciao.